I never imagined a day like that could happen in my life. I came home early from work, hoping for a quiet afternoon, maybe a cup of tea and a few minutes to myself. Instead, what I walked into stopped me cold. My husband, Frank, was there, but not alone. The woman next to him was none other than Samantha, my daughter-in-law. The shock hit me first, a jolt straight to the heart. But it was her smile that froze me in place. It was not shy or apologetic, it was brazen. Almost triumphant, like she had been waiting for me to see it. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to process the betrayal unfolding right in front of me. Anger, disbelief, and a strange sense of determination mingled in my chest. I knew at that moment that I could not just react blindly. I needed clarity, evidence, and a plan. This was not just about a broken marriage. It was about deception, manipulation, and the trust that had been shattered. As I quietly retreated to my room, my mind raced. How long had this been going on? What else was hidden behind Frank's casual smiles and Samantha's charm? I realized that to face this, I would need to stay calm, observe, and gather the truth without letting my emotions take control. The moment had sparked something in me, a drive to uncover the full story and confront it head-on. If you want to follow my journey as I navigate this tangled web of lies, deception, and ultimately, empowerment, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss a single twist of this story. Is a real-life tale of courage, clarity, and reclaiming control when everything you thought you knew is turned upside down. After the shock of catching Frank with Samantha had settled into a dull ache in my chest, I knew I could not allow myself to be consumed entirely by anger or despair. I needed to see the full picture, and the more I thought about it, the more I suspected the betrayal extended beyond just their fleeting moments together. Something in the way Frank had been secretive over the past months, the unusual withdrawals, the hushed phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room, hinted at a deeper, more calculated deception. I resolved to find out everything I could, and I approached it the way I always had when faced with a puzzle. Systematically, with patience and precision. I started with the joint accounts, pretending to casually review our finances while secretly noting the details that seemed off. At first, the discrepancies were subtle, small amounts that might have been dismissed as mistakes or bank fees. But as I dug deeper, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Over the past 6 months, Frank had been siphoning money in a way that was methodical, almost surgical, carefully transferring funds that I had assumed were earmarked for bills or savings. Each transaction told a story of intent, a trail of greed that had been masked by his charm and practiced nonchalance. It was one thing to betray me emotionally, but the deliberate manipulation of our shared finances revealed a depth of deception that shook me to my core. As I collected more evidence, I noticed the way he had attempted to cover his tracks, always leaving just enough ambiguity to make it seem plausible at first glance. The careful timing of his withdrawals, the small amounts that grew cumulatively into significant sums, and the way he monitored my awareness of our account balances showed me that this had been planned, not a moment of weakness or impulse. Frank had been leading a double life right under my nose. One part devoted husband and appearance, and another part calculating opportunist. And the more I uncovered, the clearer the scope of his betrayal became. The revelation was painful, but it also ignited a strange sense of empowerment. I had spent months second-guessing myself, wondering if I had imagined the signs, if I was being overly suspicious or paranoid. No, the evidence was undeniable, tangible, and irrefutable. Each bank statement, each unusual transfer, each carefully hidden detail painted a picture of a man who had not only betrayed our trust, but had done so with deliberate intent. The sense of shock gradually shifted into resolve. I realized that knowing the truth gave me control, and control was exactly what I needed to reclaim my life. As I organized the documentation, compiling spreadsheets and noting patterns, I began to see the narrative clearly. Frank had been living a life of duplicity, balancing two identities, and somehow believing he could maintain both without consequence. My methodical approach to uncovering the financial truth became a mirror to the emotional clarity I was gaining. Every detail I recorded, every inconsistency I highlighted, strengthened my understanding not just of his betrayal, but of the resilience I had always carried within me. By the time I had assembled the full picture, I was no longer merely a shocked wife. I was a woman armed with the knowledge to confront deception, to navigate the aftermath with a clear mind, and to rebuild the stability that had been so ruthlessly undermined. It was not just about the money. It was about integrity, accountability, and reclaiming a sense of agency that had been stolen in the quiet manipulation of daily life. As I looked over the meticulous records I had assembled, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The betrayal had been profound, but the act of uncovering it systematically had transformed my shock into strength, giving me the clarity to face Frank and the choices he had made with a certainty that no denial or charm could ever obscure. The path ahead was still uncertain, but armed with the truth, I knew I could navigate it with unwavering resolve. After weeks of quietly gathering evidence, I finally felt a sense of clarity that allowed me to think beyond the immediate shock and hurt. The betrayal had been raw and consuming at first. But now, with the facts laid bare in meticulous records of financial deceit and hidden transactions, I could see a path forward that did not rely on blind emotion or impulsive confrontation. I realized that if I reacted too quickly, if I let anger dictate my action, the entire effort I had invested in understanding the full scope of Frank's duplicity would be wasted. I needed strategy, precision, and above all, a calm presence that would turn the tables without giving them the upper hand. I began by securing my finances, ensuring that every account, every asset that I controlled was protected from further manipulation. The process was painstaking. Reviewing permissions, changing passwords, and transferring funds in a way that would make it impossible for Frank to access them without my knowledge. It was a quiet act of reclaiming power, an assertion of control that felt almost like a ritual of self-preservation. Each careful step reinforced my sense of agency, and with each layer of security I added, I could feel the weight of fear and uncertainty lifting slightly, replaced by a determination that had been dormant for far too long. While safeguarding my resources, I simultaneously began to map out the confrontation. I knew it could not be a scene driven purely by emotion. It had to be a moment that revealed the truth clearly, leaving no room for excuses or misdirection. I visualized the moment over and over in my mind, considering every detail, the timing, the words I would use, the subtle ways I could present the evidence to expose not just Frank's betrayal, but the audacity of Samantha's involvement. I imagined a calm, unwavering presence that would allow the truth to speak for itself, a strategy that required patience and the discipline to hold back the storm of anger that raged beneath the surface. As I prepared, I thought about the layers of deception I had uncovered and how they had intertwined with the everyday rhythm of our lives, how trust had been eroded gradually, almost imperceptibly, until it shattered in a single moment of revelation. That awareness fueled my resolve. I was no longer merely reacting. I was orchestrating a response that matched the calculated way they had orchestrated their betrayal. I reviewed every piece of evidence, every bank statement, every suspicious interaction, knowing that in the confrontation, these details would form an irrefutable narrative that neither charm nor denial could undermine. At the same time, I worked to steady my own emotions, understanding that the power of the confrontation lay not in yelling or accusations, but in measured clarity. I practiced speaking calmly, articulating the facts without letting anger blur the lines, creating a mental script that would allow me to remain composed even if they attempted to manipulate the situation. The thought of seeing Samantha's brazen smile again, or Frank's practiced innocence, no longer terrified me. It steeled me. I knew that exposing the truth with composure would make their duplicity undeniable, and that the weight of evidence would speak louder than any outburst. By the time I felt fully prepared, I was in a strange state of quiet anticipation. The act of planning, of securing my position and organizing the confrontation, had transformed the initial pain into something purposeful. I had moved beyond shock and anger into a space of strategy and resolve, understanding that the ultimate confrontation was not about revenge, but about reclaiming control, asserting boundaries, and ensuring that truth and accountability prevailed. Every step I had taken gathered evidence, protecting my finances. Rehearsing the moment was a declaration that I would not be passive in the face of deceit, and that the truth, presented with calm precision, had the power to illuminate everything that had been hidden for far too long. The day I had been quietly preparing for arrived with a strange mixture of anticipation and apprehension, a tension that settled in my chest like a weight I could not shake. I had rehearsed every detail of what I would say, envisioned every possible reaction from Frank and Samantha, and yet nothing could fully prepare me for the moment when it would all be real, when the carefully gathered evidence would have to be laid bare before the one person whose presence made the truth unavoidable. My son, Mark. I chose a quiet afternoon, when the house felt still and the usual distractions were absent, giving the moment a gravity that matched the revelation I was about to deliver. I called Mark into the living room, where I had arranged the documents and statements, the meticulous records of financial transfers and transactions, along with screenshots, messages, and notes that chronicled the pattern of deception over the past 6 months. My hands trembled slightly as I set the papers on the table, not from fear of him, but from the weight of the betrayal I was about to expose. When he looked at me, puzzled and concerned, I felt the full force of my responsibility. I was not simply revealing a personal betrayal. I was exposing a network of lies that had ensnared the people I loved most. And it was up to me to do it with clarity and honesty. I began slowly, recounting the observations that had first alerted me, the moments of inconsistency, the signs of secrecy that had seemed small at the time, but now formed a clear picture. I watched Mark's expression shift from curiosity to disbelief as I laid out the evidence of Frank's misappropriation of our shared finances, explaining the transfers, the hidden accounts, and the patterns that proved intentional deception. Then I brought the more painful part into the light, revealing the affair with Samantha, the boldness of her actions, the casual arrogance that had once shocked me so deeply. The room seemed to shrink around us, the air thick with tension, as he absorbed each piece of information, the combination of financial betrayal and emotional treachery striking him with the force I had anticipated but hoped he would not have to feel so intensely. As I spoke, I maintained a calm, deliberate tone, resisting the urge to let anger or hurt dominate my words, understanding that the clarity of the evidence would carry more weight than any emotional outburst. Frank and Samantha were present, and I watched their expressions flicker, caught between denial and the dawning realization that the carefully hidden truth was now undeniable. I laid each document and screenshot before them, narrating the story of months of duplicity, showing not just isolated actions, but a consistent pattern of lies and manipulation. The tension in the room was almost tangible, the quiet punctuated only by the occasional gasp or uneven breath as the magnitude of their exposure settled over them. Mark initially stunned, began to ask questions, his voice trembling yet seeking the truth with a clarity I admired, demanding answers and explanations. I answered each calmly, using the evidence to fill in the gaps, to make clear the extent of the betrayal and to leave no room for excuse or obfuscation. Frank's attempts to speak were halting, Samantha's attempts at deflection faltering, and with each failed effort to regain control, the reality of their actions became ever more undeniable. It was a confrontation I had envisioned countless times, but experiencing it in real life carried a weight that no rehearsal could replicate. The emotional currents were raw, yet the structure I had imposed with careful preparation kept the scene from devolving into chaos. By the end, the truth had been fully revealed, the evidence laid bare, and the family forced to confront the reality of deception and betrayal. The room was heavy with silence, the air charged with emotion, and I could see in Mark's eyes the mix of shock, anger, and sorrow that I had felt so vividly myself. I realized then that the act of exposing the truth had given me a strange sense of empowerment, a reclaiming of control not just over my own life but over the situation I had endured in secret for so long. It was a tense, dramatic moment, a confrontation that none of us would forget. But through it, the lies had been unmasked, and for the first time in months, clarity and honesty occupied the spare secrecy and betrayal had once reigned. After the confrontation with Mark, I thought the revelations had exhausted the depths of Frank's betrayal, but a persistent unease gnawed at me, urging me to dig deeper. Something in the pattern of his financial maneuvers suggested a far larger scheme, a hidden layer of manipulation that had eluded me until now. Late at night, with the house quiet and the world seeming to pause around me, I began sifting through every statement, every transfer, every note I had accumulated over the years. What had seemed like isolated incidents of misconduct and short-term theft now revealed themselves as the surface of a much deeper and more disturbing pattern. As I traced the movements of funds and cross-referenced account histories, the full scope of Frank's deceit became chillingly clear. It was not merely our joint accounts he had exploited. He had methodically siphoned money from Mark's personal accounts as well, over the course of 3 long years. The sums were significant, far beyond what I had initially imagined, and the transactions were layered with subtlety, designed to evade immediate detection, leaving just enough ambiguity to create plausible deniability if anyone were to question them. Each discovery compounded the sense of shock, but also a grim clarity. This was not a temporary lapse in judgment, a momentary weakness. It was a carefully orchestrated pattern of manipulation, a long-term plan that had allowed him to enrich himself at the expense of our trust and family security. I felt a mixture of disbelief and anger, tempered by the meticulous satisfaction of uncovering truth after months of careful observation, a vindication of the cautious steps I had taken when I first suspected irregularities. The emotional weight of this revelation pressed on me heavily, yet I continued methodically, unwilling to let the magnitude of the betrayal cloud my precision. Each record I uncovered told a story of deliberate intent, of a mind skilled at hiding wrongdoing in plain sight, of a person who had betrayed not only my trust, but the trust of the son I had raised with care and hope. I realized that every act of deception, every slight transfer and hidden withdrawal, was part of a narrative of exploitation that stretched far longer than I had dared to imagine. This discovery reframed my understanding of the entire situation. Frank's affair with Samantha, shocking as it had been, was only one facet of a far broader betrayal, intertwined with financial manipulation that demonstrated an astonishing level of cunning and disregard for the family he claimed to love. I began organizing the newly uncovered evidence, carefully documenting each transaction and its corresponding date, cross-referencing it with our family events, knowing that the story these numbers told could no longer be ignored. It became clear that the confrontation with Mark had only scratched the surface. This deeper layer revealed a systematic erosion of our family's resources, a calculated exploitation that could not be excused or overlooked. I felt a cold clarity settle over me, a sense that justice required thoroughness. That exposing the full extent of Frank's actions was not only necessary for accountability, but essential for Mark's understanding of the depth of the deception. As I pieced together this 3-year tapestry of theft and manipulation, the enormity of what had been hidden from us weighed heavily, but it also steeled my resolve. Every carefully hidden transfer, every subtle attempt to obscure the truth, was now laid bare, and I felt a grim satisfaction in knowing that nothing could remain concealed any longer. The betrayal was comprehensive, the manipulation extensive, but the truth, meticulously uncovered, would serve as the foundation for confronting Frank and Samantha fully, a reckoning that would expose the long-term deceit and restore, in some measure, the clarity and security that had been so ruthlessly stolen from us. The day Frank was taken into custody, I felt a mixture of vindication and exhaustion, a strange calm after years of simmering tension and hidden betrayal. Watching him led away in handcuffs, I could not help but reflect on how carefully this moment had been built, step by step, evidence by evidence. A quiet, deliberate unfolding of truth that left no room for denial or manipulation. The law would handle his crimes, but the emotional and moral reckoning was mine, and mine alone, and I embraced it fully. There was a clarity in seeing justice served, a stark reminder that deception, no matter how long it hides behind smiles and excuses, eventually faces the light, and the accountability Frank could no longer escape underscored the magnitude of what had been done to us. Samantha, too, could no longer hide behind her charm or excuses. Her complicity had been painstakingly documented, her smiles and whispered reassurances now laid bare as calculated acts within a web of deceit. Facing her was almost surreal. The once familiar presence of my daughter-in-law had been transformed by betrayal into a symbol of trust broken and boundaries crossed. I made it clear that her actions carried consequences, that the relationships she had violated would not simply be repaired with apologies or empty gestures, and that the safety, integrity, and dignity of our family would now be my priority above all else. The power dynamic had shifted entirely, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of control that had been absent amidst the chaos of hidden schemes and secret transfers. I took deliberate steps to secure our finances and reestablish stability, ensuring that Mark, my son, could see that betrayal, however painful, need not leave a permanent mark on our lives if met with resilience and careful planning. There was a hard-earned lesson in all of this: vigilance, patience, and meticulous attention to detail are weapons as powerful as the law when confronting deception. I knew that the scars left by these events were deep, perhaps irreparable, but I also recognized that empowerment comes from understanding the truth fully, acting decisively, and refusing to allow betrayal to dictate the terms of one's life. My voice, calm yet, communicated that clarity, warning that trust once shattered cannot be casually rebuilt, and that accountability is the cornerstone of any meaningful relationship. As I reflect on this journey, I realize that while pain and anger were inevitable companions, so too were clarity and strength, and that emerging from betrayal requires not only evidence and confrontation, but an unshakable commitment to one's own principles. I hope my story resonates with anyone facing deception, encouraging vigilance and courage in the face of dishonesty. If you found this story compelling, please support the channel by liking, subscribing, and sharing, so we can continue exploring stories of human resilience, accountability, and the power of truth. Thank you for listening. And remember, the path through betrayal is never easy, but facing it with clarity and determination allows justice and dignity to prevail.